Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Beyond Borders. As many of you may know, I'm the Executive Director of Beyond Borders, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce this next session. One of the most important purposes of Beyond Borders is to try and promote mutual understanding between different cultures, peoples, and nations. And one way we do that is by using the medium of the arts and the spoken word to actually try and share different experiences and perspectives from many different people from around the world. One of the most pressing issues for domestic, European, and global policymakers is how to deal with claims for autonomy, self-determination, and the devolution of power. We know in Scotland that this is and has been a major issue. It remains a major issue in the United Kingdom and all around the world. So it's within that context that we have provided a neutral space for the discussion of this most important issue and invited, first of all, the current president of the government of Catalonia, Mr. Tora. Unfortunately, he has not been able to make it due to other commitments, but I'm extremely pleased to say that the former, and some will say serving current president of Catalonia from Belgium has agreed to come and take his place. So can I ask you to give a very warm welcome to, first of all, your host, Mr. Oscar Guardiola-Rivera, and of course, President Puigdemont.
On the 20th of May, 1937, George Orwell was shot through the throat by a sniper while fighting for the Republican cause on the anti-Stalinist side during the Spanish Civil War. He tells us in homage to Catalonia that people used to say to him, well, I mean, if you survive a shot through the neck, you must be the luckiest man alive. To which he would reply, well, it would have been even luckier not to have been hit at all. Later on, we'll see if our guest today finds himself in a similar position. But first, let me just welcome him and yourselves to this neutral space, this safe space for dialogue. And dialogue is what we are going to emphasize in this conversation. We're not just going to perform a dialogue, we're going to invite and call for dialogue. My name is Oscar Guardiola. I am a member of this family. I am a man of color from Latin America, which means that my first reaction when I heard of the subject of Catalonian independence was, what took you so long? My second was dialogue. And this is the perfect place. This is a platform for dialogue among others, small nations. And that is precisely what we're going to be talking about today. But first, let me ask our guest to introduce himself to the beautiful audience at Traquair. So who is Carles Puigdemont Casamayor?
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to thank to Beyond Borders to invite us, first President Tor and then myself, in order to be able to share with you my point of view about our experience and the reasons why we are here. Thank you very much to be here in such a wonderful Scottish summer day. And second, I want to apologize because I'm not a fluent English speaker, but you will understand, and I will try to do the best in order to explain better than I can.
Well, you have a Beatles head, though, so
Yeah.
no problem there.
My accent is from Liverpool. No, really. Well, I'm 130th president of the history of Catalonia. I was a president. I was elected in January of 2016. Our government, my institution, was founded in the Middle Age, and despite all wars, all threats, all provisions, we're still defending our institutions, our rights, our historical rights, our language, our identity. I'm a journalist. I'm not a politician. Well, I'm doing politics, but I'm a journalist. And I was mayor of Girona before I was elected Catalan president. And all my life, I was committed to one very important word for myself, is democracy. I was born during the Franco dictatorship. Franco dies when I was 13, near 14. So I remember perfectly what does mean the lack of democracy or freedom. When I was born, my family was not able to inscribe myself with my Catalan name because the use of Catalan language was prohibited publicly in the administration, the schools, in the media. So I remember perfect what does mean if you are living in a dictatorship. For that reason, when I was a teenager, I feel myself a Democrat. And my commitment was at that time, I will fighting always for freedom and for democracy despite my job. It doesn't matter if I'm journalist or politician or mechanic or lawyer, it doesn't matter. My commitment will be always to democracy. And that commitment forced to me accept in a very complicated moment the proposal that comes from former Catalan President Artur Mas to be elected in only 24 hours, the Catalan President. Well, I'm living in exile since the end of October last year. A significant part of my former government is still in jail, facing charge for rebellion and embezzlement of funds that could represent near 30 years in jail. Other former members of my cabinet are in exile too. One of them, probably you know, is here in Scotland, Clara Ponsatí. Others are in Belgium with me, and others are in Switzerland. Attending what? Attending the normalization of the situation. I will stress the fact that the 9 of my colleagues still in jail are there without trial. And they were elected, and they act as elected politicians, but because that they are in jail. So my job now, my duty, is not to explain myself who is Carles Puigdemont, but why I'm here, and what is my duty for the next months and the next years, in order to what? In order to allow Catalan people to decide for themselves its own future.
On the subject of why you're here and where you come from, correct me if I'm mistaken, but you come from a family of bakers.
Yes.
If memory serves me well, Pastisserie Puigdemont was founded around 1928, something like that. Yeah. Could you explain to the audience how the cake called Catalan independence was baked? Tell us the story.
Well, this is a question for my father or my brother, who is still in the bakery. Well, if you want to cooking a cake like this, you need some things that are absolutely necessary to do it. First, people. That is important. We never can decide without people. And that one is the key questions of our conflict. Second, human rights. All in the framework of the human rights, it's possible and must be defended. And our duty as governors is to allow the possibility to exercise the human rights. And finally, because it's in the frame of human rights, respect. Respect for the others that think different to you. And because that is the basis of the cohesion and the democracy. And if you put all these ingredients, you probably will cook not only a Catalan cake, but a democratic cake that could help other cases as Catalonia in order to solve peacefully one of the most important conflicts that are in our time, the conflict of self-determination of the peoples.
So you gave us three ingredients: people, human rights, and let's call the third one dialogue.
Yeah.
You serve as you serve in the council of Girona, then as a member, as a mayor of the city, became a member of the Catalonian Parliament, and as you just pointed out, the 130th president of Catalonia, which tells us already about the long tradition of democratic and republican institutions we're talking about. And as president, you presided over the approval of laws that would permit a referendum. That referendum took place despite a decision by the Spanish Constitutional Court, according to which the referendum was in breach of the Constitution. It happens, and the result is in favor of independence, 92%. However, the turnout was around 42%. How difficult it was to move towards the declaration of independence in view of such results?
Well, don't forget that that referendum was called despite enormous efforts from the Spanish state to prevent it. And during a very, very violent day, the 1st of October referendum, trying to prevent the referendum takes place. So if you remember the images, if you look all the difficulties to arrive at more than 42% of population to participate in that referendum, that is a very high success. But it's not enough, probably. Our priority was, and still is, to agree with the Spanish state a referendum in which both sides could and want to explain openly in favor or against independence, and with the clear commitment to both sides, Catalan government and Spanish government, about the implementation of the results. And that is the best way to know what Catalan people think about the possibility to be independent. But for us was, on the other hand, enough to decide to declare independence. Why? Because more than 2,400,000 people participate in that referendum, despite all these difficulties, that problems, and we says in Parliament we will apply the results of that referendum. Till that, myself as a president, but in the majority, also the majority in the Catalan parliament, has demanded several times to the Spanish government a dialogue to organize that referendum.
Now, what you just said is very important, so I might say historic, because you're effectively here today opening the space for newer and deeper opportunities for dialogue between the Catalonian and the Spanish government. I happened to be in Barcelona in between the 1st and the 3rd of October. I saw with my own eyes the very heavy-handed, to say the least, reaction coming from the police. They had been brought in cruises. Funnily enough, I remember one of them had had a cartoon painted on it, so it was really, really awkward, quite surreal to see this huge cruise, tourist cruise, with a cartoon painted on the side, sort of Walt Disney, Warner Brothers thing, and then all these members of the security forces waiting and being shipped off and kicking people. So that repression, to many of my friends who were there, who considered themselves soberanistas, that is to say, for self-determination, but not necessarily for independence, this meant a change. This was a cognitive shift, as Tim would say. It meant that they went to vote, again, not necessarily for independence, but to defend democratic institutions, which they saw under attack by what has to be considered, persistent pockets of Francoism within the state. But your critics say that that opportunity was squandered because at that point you had the possibility of building a wider coalition. What would you say to such critics?
Well, that year we celebrate the 14 years of the Spanish Constitution approval. And all the evidences are showing that kind of coalitions, it's quite difficult to be implemented within the Spanish state. Because the Catalan issue, I'm very sad to say that, but it's really, the Catalan issue provides a lot of voters for the Spanish parties all around Spain. And it's quite difficult to find an agreement with other political forces or regions in order to create an alternative at that status quo.
Why is it so difficult? I mean, every single autonomy in Spain could tell the same kind of narrative that you have told us. Part of my family is from the Canary Islands. Very strong tradition of both independentismo and soberanismo. And yet, to go back to the critics, they say, well, what was lacking here was precisely that wider alliance. Why was it impossible to talk to the Basques, to the Canarians, and bring them together? Wouldn't that have created a perception of unity?
What we has done that way, we has have a good relationship with the other parts of Spain, like Basque Country, or in Galicia, or Valencia, or Balearic Island. But that doesn't mean they are ready to support our right to self-determination. Look, we are only 16% of the Spanish population. We are a minority inside Spain. So it's quite difficult for us to be part of a project to transform Spain. And if you look the governments from the rest of the autonomous regions in Spain, you can see basically a majority from the Populist Party and a minority from the Socialist Party. So when we met the rest of the presidents of the autonomous regions in Spain, it's absolutely difficult to find a government which is ruled by or a Socialist Party or a Populist Party. And don't forget that in the so-called President's Conference of Regions in Spain, the majority is held by the Spanish government. So it's impossible, in case if you have an agreement with the rest of the Spanish region in order to force the Spanish government, for example, in a change on the fiscal system or doesn't matter what, you have not the power to do it because the majority remains in the hands of the Spanish government. So after 40 years of a Spanish constitution, we have tried to propose several ways to solve the Catalan issue, not independence, and fiscal agreement, and new constitutional regional law, a non-binding consultation, etc. And always was a no. The last attempt in 26, when Catalan Parliament has approved with a large majority a new project for a so-called Statute of Autonomy. Mm-hmm. And after that, the Spanish Parliament has approved too that law, obviously with some change. And after that, we approved through a legal referendum with a large majority in Catalonia. Despite this, that law is not the law we use today, because the Spanish Constitutional Court, formed at that time by 10 members elected by the political majority, has decided to cut and to suspend the majority of the main articles of that law approved by both parliaments by referendum. At that time, a significant majority of Catalan people has made that I call intimated declaration of independence, saying, well, probably to be Spaniards in the way that the majority of Catalans want to be is not possible. And probably to find respect and to find the possibility to dialogue directly with the Spanish government, the only way to do that is to be an independent state.
But doesn't that paint both parties into a corner? I mean, this goes back to the very important observation you made about the persistence of pockets of Falangismo. You just suggested that among the members of the judiciary, the highest ranking members of the judiciary, the Constitutional Court in this particular case, one can see the persistence of Francoismo. It is as if, to put it in perspective, one would say, well, everybody thinks World War II was won everywhere. It wasn't. And it wasn't in Spain. And what we are witnessing is precisely the implications of that. It is those divisions and the persistence of those divisions which is making dialogue more and more difficult.
Yeah, this is true. The grave of Franco is still in the public monument. You can go to Madrid and pay €9 and pay a visit to the body of Franco and the body of the founder of the fascist party in Spain, La Falange. And that grave is paid by the public funds. And is, I think, the only case in Europe that you can see in a democracy a body, a grave in a public monument, which calls every year a lot of people showing its support to the fascist regime. If you look to the reality, you can find a Francisco Franco Foundation, which is absolutely legal and has received public funds. If you look at the news that year, 2018, you can see the title of the Duchess of Franco has renewed by the Spanish government. And no one of that is illegal. The only thing that is illegal in Spain is to call for a referendum of self-determination. And that is the paradox. Yes, honestly, the Spanish government has decided last Friday, to remove the body of Franco. That is a good news. And no, seriously, but 43 years later. And during that time, in a so-called exemplary democracy, every day you can pay a homage to the dictator, Franco. That shows the democratic transition was a failure. Not only because the king of Spain was nominated by Franco, that is obviously is an evidence, it's not an opinion, but because the deep state is not so far from the Francoship dictatorship, the culture, I mean. The Consejo General del Poder Judicial, the organ that rules the judiciary system in Spain, the members are elected only by political majorities, not because it's merits, only by political majority. So if you look the papers that week, last week, 2 weeks ago, you can find a lot of manifestos signed by the former military members of the army supporting Franco, and that it's legal. But if you sign a song against the monarchy, you will be condemned for more than 3 years in jail, as the case of Josep Baltonic shows. And that artist, Josep Baltonic, is still now in Belgium with us in exile, because he was condemned more than 3 years in jail for a letter against the monarchy. But you can appear in the public TV and saying, okay, Franco was not so bad, was not a dictatorship, was probably an authoritarian leader, but it's quite different from the fascist regimes. That is one of the keys to understand what's going on in Spain.
Is this the reason that explains why, for instance, your attempts to hold conversations with the former government, the Rajoy government, seem to go nowhere? I mean, you may want to confirm whether this story is truth or not, but it is said that you had a meeting with him in which he confessed to you, well, might be desirable to come to an agreement, but I can't. And then he turns back and says something different.
Yes, when we met for last time, Prime Minister Rajoy, I tried to convince that the best way to solve that problem is to start political talks with no red lines, with no preconditions, only in the way to show for the rest of the citizens we are at disposal at a political solution. And at that moment he said, well, I can't. I asked, why you can't? Well, because the Spanish law, etc. I explained, before the approval of the Spanish Constitution, the government at that time, they didn't count to restore the Catalan government because the president was in exile and the Catalan government was prohibited by Franco from 1938. So literally, they can't, but they did, because they approved a kind of transitorial approval to allow the Catalan president in exile to travel to Spain and to arrive in Catalonia as a president, because they understand, the Spanish government at the time understood perfectly, the majority of Catalan wants to recuperate our self-government. And the leadership of the Catalan president in exile must be recognized by the law, despite the laws enacting not allow that possibility. But when Rajoy has thinking about that after, for me, a dramatic silence, they say, well, but I don't want. Okay, that it's different. Because if you...
It's not I can't, I don't want to.
Because if you want, you can. And we can arrive at a solution to find what is the best way. And finally, when he said clearly and honestly, of course, I don't want, for me, that was a shock. Because in a democracy, as a former liberal Spanish leader said me once, in a democracy, the right to not dialogue doesn't exist. And at that time, I realized that could end in a very serious conflict.
Now, this is also the reason why many, including people who are not necessarily in support of Catalonian independence, do call for the general mobilization of all political forces in defense of democracy. I'm thinking of people such as the very influential writer Vincenzo Navarro and others. Do you see yourselves as part of that wider coalition, wider movement of forces to defend Spanish democracy? And if so, together with what others? Perhaps Podemos, the socialists?
Yes, it exists in Spain a left party called Podemos who openly supports the right of self-determination. It must be said that, because that it's real and that is new in the Spanish cultural scenario.
Is the party in government in the city of Barcelona?
Well, it's a coalition part, yet in Madrid, in other main cities in Spain. But his support in the polls has decreasing. But it's the only way to have an agreement with the Spanish government if the Podemos or other parties like that supports our right to self-determination. But despite this, all around Europe, you can see that movement for the self-determination right, it's having increasing support. Because people see that right is a key element, a key right, in order to solve violence, to prevent wars, to solve conflicts. The second most intelligent thing that can be done is to solve conflicts. But the first is to prevent it, to anticipate. And the right of self-determination is one of the best tools in the frame of the human rights that can be used in order to prevent that kind of conflicts. That means we need coalitions, we need associates, we need to create a network of interest around Europe, formed by people, parties, regions that believes the only future for a unified Europe, for a unified, politically unified Europe, is to respect clearly the diversity and to allow democratic tools to manage that diversity. That is our power. That is our opportunity. And in the next elections, European elections, unfortunately, Scotland will not participate in that. I want to see a huge coalition or a huge compromise formed by several parties around Europe defending the right of self-determination.
Before we go to questions from the audience, does what you just said mean that you see the possibility of a constitutional arrangement or a political arrangement in Spain which does not include succession, but might allow for the right of self-determination, a confederation, for instance? Because, of course, you have made a very important distinction. The right to self-determination, or what Spaniards call soberanismo, is not necessarily the same as independence.
You are right. You are right. That is important for me. It's more important to exercise that right than to be independent or not. Because if you exercise that right, you are a people, you are a nation, really. And that will force a change in the status quo in a relationship with Spain and Catalonia. I want to remark that I think it's the 96th article of the Spanish Constitution. They say the international treaties and covenants signed by the Kingdom of Spain are part of the internal order of Spain. Mm-hmm. And in 1976, the Kingdom of Spain has signed the International Covenant on Political and Civil Rights, in which first article, as you know, say all peoples are the right of self-determination. So you don't need to reform the Spanish Constitution to call for a referendum of self-determination in Catalonia. And one thing more, if you look, I think it's the Article 8, the Spanish Constitution say clearly, Spain is formed by regions and nationalities. Is a word different from regions. It's something different. But no one single government in Spain during the last 4 decades has explained what does nationalities mean. Because our expertise, all the evidences show they consider regions and nationalities the same. But why the Spanish Constitution? Why the people who has approved and prepared that Constitution make such a difference? So if we, our right to self-determination will be respect, that is a key point in order to solve, for example, or to accept, or to have a majority in Catalonia that could be accept a confederation proposal in order to remain in Spain, but be respected as a nation.
With that very important call for the possibility of dialogue around the central right to self-determination, which is at the core of human rights, let us open our session for questions from the audience. I'm sure you have plenty of them, and we have time for them. So let us take, at the very least, 2 questions. There is one here. Ben, please. Another one. And over there.
Could I just ask President Puigdemont to describe how he sees the next 6 to 12 months unfolding in the light of the current detention of 9 Democratic politicians and the fact that they're due to go on trial in November? What effect is that likely to have on the current status quo?
Well, if you look the sky is very dark. But still there
Very
is...
dark and falling down.
Well, we'll see. But there is a real possibility to open clear and strong dialogue with the Spanish government. It is in the next September when the political course starts, Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez has the opportunity to explain, not only to use a new vocabulary that he used now, and to change the climate that is obviously has changed in positive way, but to do something concrete and to put something clear on the table in order to allow a political discussion about the main subject, which is this right of self-determination. Is a real opportunity, yes. And if Pedro Sánchez or the Spanish government or the political majority in the Spanish parliament open that door, I'm sure the Catalan government and the Catalan society will participate clearly in that event, in that opportunity. That is our priority. But despite this darkness and a milestone full of very significant events, not only the trial, the sentence too, despite this, yes, there is an opportunity. We must to follow, to allow that opportunity.
I would like to congratulate Mr. Puigdemont for his English, because I've been living in this country, in Scotland, for the last 20 years, and his English is probably better than mine. And following that, I would like to first make a point here. He's mentioning several times the word respect. I was in my 20s when Franco died, and I remember taking to the streets under the theme of freedom, democracy, and devolution. And when he is depicting the Spanish government and the 40 last years of democratic government under a fascism and Francoism ideology, I think he's expressing something that he's also accusing other Spaniards of not respecting each other. And I think he should be much more careful with all the Spaniards that we took to the streets, even though we were not nationalists, to defend the devolution. And I think it's very important to respect each other's dignity. I think, as you were saying, you are aiming for recognition of Catalonia as a nation, but you cannot do that in Spain by confronting and accusing the other Spaniards of being fascists. That's probably not the way to go. And my final question, that's the question, that first was the point, and I would like to remind everybody here that there is always two sides of a story. And Spain is not the Inquisition country of Monty Python. But my two questions to Senor Puigdemont are the following. The first one is that if you want to call for any self-determination referendum, you would like to guarantee two things: the rights of minorities and secure borders. And those two issues are not clearly enough. In Catalonia, in the education, everything is taught in Catalan, while there are 60% of Catalonian citizens that their mother tongue is Spanish. So when are we going to see a bilingual, not a two systems of education, but a bilingual recognition of the Spanish language in the schools? First point. Second point, in the coalition that Mr. Puigdemont was heading, there are two parties that in their programs, they are aiming for a great Catalonia that includes Valencia and the Balearic Islands, the Países Catalanes. I would like that Mr. Puigdemont clarifies under which borders and what are the long-term aims of his movement towards this great Catalonia that would extend 3 times the extension of what is now Catalonia and would include many other people that they feel strongly.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm sure the point.
Thank
has
you.
been made.
In your reply, you has right. When I talk about Spain, I don't mean Spaniards or Spanish population. I mean Spanish state. It's not the same. Yes.
Let us remember that part of what we do
can
here
make
is listening.
A clear difference between when I talk about Spanish authorities, Spanish deep state, or how the juridical system works, between that and between the Spanish population, which of course we have nothing against them, because we are friends, we are brothers, our families are mixed, and we are very, very proud to know both languages, Catalan and Spanish. It's not true that everything is explained in Catalan. That is not true. And please, when you want to say something as important like that, be careful, because I invite you to go in any public school in Catalonia, enter in the classroom, ask the teacher or ask the scholars and the child, and they can answer in Catalan and in Spanish. But if that is not enough, I suggest you go to the PISA report and the linguistical skills for Catalan society in both languages. The PISA reports, not from Catalan government, the PISA report. And what is PISA report saying? Well, the skills, the linguistical skills from Catalan people in Spanish are equal or better than the monolingual Spanish regions. So there is not one single problem teaching in Spanish or in Catalonia. Both languages are official. Both languages will continue to be officials in independent Catalonia. We are very proud to talk, to understand, to write Spain and Catalan. And I can show you a lot of examples. That is one is the worst fake news about our situation. And finally, exactly which party from my coalition, electoral coalition, but I'm from Junts per Catalunya, is another party. I'm fighting in elections against Esquerra Republicana and CUP, and I won. So if you want to say, it's necessary to explain clear, because we are not in favor for a great Catalonia, please. Thank you. It is clear. And we have not one single claim over French Catalonia, over Valencia, over Balearic Island, or over the Sardinian city of l'Alguer, when they, because we speaks Catalan.
Mr. President, we have two more questions, one here, one there.
Yes, what kind of confederation do you imagine?
Well, confederation means sovereignty. So that the key point is to recognize the sovereignty of several nations in Spain. Well, it's not easy to to respond that way because we are working in a independent republic. But we can see a very successful example of confederation, Switzerland. That is good not only for its respect to minorities, but for its commitment to democracy. Because the power is in the hands of the citizens. And that is the country, the kind of country that we want to live. If a Spanish or Iberian confederation allows us to construct a society with more power, with the more devolved powers to the people, well, we can agree not only with Spain, but other countries. For example, a confederation, a European confederation of nations and regions. But that means an equal dialogue with other regions. If that equal dialogue exists and is respected, all is possible. All is possible.
I'm Shaheen, a Beyond Borders 1425 fellow here from Pakistan, and my question is around more or less the same that you have partly answered. The very notion of self-determination with the president, does it fall in the external self-determination or internal self-determination? Because you yourself has been elected as a president. So it's a very question of sovereignty. You said it will be sovereign. It's more or less an independent state. So if you can elaborate a little more on that, how
Yes.
you want to exercise this right of self-determination. Thank you.
Well, when I said the self-determination right doesn't mean immediately, automatically independence, I mean is a right that concerns the dignity of a people. If you, as a people, you are respected, and one significant way to respect your dignity is self-determination, despite you be or not independent, you are respected as a people. That is the very important concept that I want to stress. Of course, I'm pro in an independent Catalonia, but if the decision of the majority of Catalan people in a referendum of self-determination decides to remain in Spain, that doesn't mean we have not the right of self-determination. We exercise our right, but in a way that the majority decides. And that is one of the most important rights, from my point of view, to prevent violence and wars. A significant numbers of wars after 1945 has its origin in not to respect the right of self-determination. Probably we can prevent a lot of wars respecting from the basis, from the origin, the right of self-determination of the peoples. But of course, you can defend to be independent or not, or to be part of confederation, or accept the current statu quo. That is the real means of self-determination right.
We have under 5 minutes. Let us take the two final questions together.
I'll be very brief. It's just to reply to the gentleman there. I'm a Catalan who's lived in Scotland for 20 years, and my children were born here. We decided to go back to Catalonia when they were 7 and 9. They went to a Catalan rural school, and I can only say that they learned Catalan from me, and I never spoke Spanish to them, and they graduated and they did the primary, secondary school, and one of them has done degree in Hispanic studies. He speaks fluent Spanish. So he learned Spanish at school in Catalonia, rural Catalonia. So I'm sorry, to say, but this is a great example how Spanish is taught in Catalan schools as well as Catalan.
Thank you. And the question, the final question?
Given some of the outcomes that have happened as a result of the referendum, is there anything you would have done differently?
Sorry, could you repeat?
Si, dados los resultados del referendo, ¿harías algo de manera diferente?
Not because the results of the referendum, but I say, I think when I was in Germany, that last 4 months, I say I was wrong when in the 10th of October, I decided to suspend the effects of the Declaration of Independence. I decided that because in our talks, in the kind of black channel with the Spanish government at that time after the referendum, they has ensured the possibility to start a political dialogue. And I received a lot of messages from the ambassadors saying, well, you has done the referendum, you succeed, but please do not nothing unilaterally, and please allow the possibility to dialogue with Spain. I say yes, because I believe in that way. Despite the moment was that moment to declare and to exercise the independence, I decided to suspend it. But finally I discovered it was a lie. And the Spanish government never has allowed any kind official or not official, public or not public possibility to dialogue with them. Now I will not suspend anymore Declaration of Independence.
Beyond Borders is the platform for a small nation dialogue and cultural exchange. That self-definition has never been better confirmed than by this dialogue, which is calling for further dialogue. Let us hope that what lies ahead, both for Catalonia and for Europe, for our sakes, is dialogue, for Scotland, for the UK, is dialogue, and for Colombia, is dialogue and reconstruction under the premises precisely of the right to determine our futures and to build together that better future. Please join me in gratitude and celebration of Carlos Puigdemont. Thank you very much.
Welcome.